B-movie looks like a goofy animated comedy, until you really sit with it and realize it is one of the saddest stories ever made about adult life. Because by the time the movie ends, Barry has not beaten the system. He has only learned the most terrifying lesson the system can teach. That the world around him depends on his exploitation, that everything stays pretty only while somebody keeps sacrificing their life to maintain it, and that if the workers ever stop, if the tired people ever put their hands down and say no more, the whole structure starts to rot in public. And that is why B-movie is not really a joke about a bee suing humans. It is a psychological thriller about routine, guilt, labor, burnout, and the brutal idea that society has been designed to fall apart the second you stop enriching it with your energy. The opening minutes of this movie are a nightmare in bright colors. Barry graduates, walks out into a celebration, and immediately gets pushed toward the biggest decision of his life, choosing one job for the rest of his existence. Not for a season, not until he finds himself, not until he saves money, not until he needs a change, but forever. One function, one lane, one repetitive task, one identity welded to one machine until death. The movie presents it like a quirky bit of world building, but if you strip out the upbeat rhythm and the jokes, what you are left with is a society that does not allow a person to become a person before assigning that person to production. It is a system that looks at a living being and asks only one question: what can we use you for? That is the first real horror in B-movie. Barry is born into a world that treats work the way religion treats destiny. It is not framed as a choice in any meaningful sense. It is framed as the natural order. Everybody around him acts like it would be ridiculous to want more than function. Everybody speaks with the weird confidence of people who have been trained so completely by a machine that they no longer notice the machine. The adults are calm, the culture is efficient, the process is smooth, and that smoothness is exactly what makes it creepy. Nothing looks violent, but everything is violent. Nobody is screaming, yet every life is already spoken for. And if you have ever looked at your own life and felt that little cold panic rise in your chest, if you have ever noticed how early we get pushed into choosing a lane that starts to define our value, then you already understand what the movie is doing. It is taking the pressure of modern adulthood and turning it into a hive. You go to school so you can get a job. You get a job so you can keep paying for the right to stay alive. You adapt your personality to fit the place that pays you. And somewhere in the middle of all that, your life starts sounding less like living and more like clocking in. That is why this movie hits harder as an adult than it ever could as a kid. Kids see bees choosing jobs. Adults see themselves being sorted into useful categories. Kids hear jokes about work. Adults hear the quiet threat underneath those jokes. Pick your place, keep the machine running, and do not ask too many questions. The bees do not get weekends. They do not get vacations. They do not get a gap year to think. They do not get to fail, wander, rest, or reinvent themselves. They exist to produce honey, and the system only respects them while they keep producing it. Tell me, that does not sound familiar. Tell me that does not feel like the modern work script stripped down to its bones. A lot of people wake up every day, drag themselves through traffic or onto a train or to a screen, perform a role they never loved, hand over their time, their attention, their youth, and their nervous system to a company they do not own, and then call it adulthood because that sounds less painful than calling it captivity. The movie understands this in a very simple but brutal way. Honey is wealth. Honey is value. Honey is the thing everybody lives around, and the ones producing it are not the ones truly benefiting from it. They spend their lives making the thing that keeps the world moving, but that thing becomes detached from them. It belongs to the structure. It belongs to the system. It belongs to whoever controls the flow. That is the same sick feeling people have when they build value all day and go home with just enough to show up again tomorrow. You can feel it in offices, in warehouses, in restaurants, in hospitals, in schools, in delivery apps, in every job where the person doing the essential work somehow ends up with the smallest share of what that work creates. Barry's discomfort is the first spark of consciousness in the film, and it matters because it is not heroic at first. It is just human. He is not some polished revolutionary with a perfect theory. He is a young guy staring at a future that has already been decided for him, and feeling that something about it is deeply wrong. That feeling is where so much political and emotional clarity begins in real life, not with a manifesto, with a bad feeling, with the sudden realization that what everyone around you calls normal might actually be insane. Barry looks at a life of permanent labor and says, wait, this cannot be it. This cannot be the whole shape of existence. And when he does that, the hive responds the way every rigid system responds when somebody starts thinking too clearly. It minimizes the doubt, it normalizes the punishment, it rushes him toward acceptance. His parents talk like there is no alternative. His culture talks like wanting one is childish. The structure moves fast because a fast structure gives people less time to think. That is not just a B problem. That is a modern life problem. People are kept tired, busy, anxious, and financially cornered because exhausted people are easier to manage. If you are always trying to recover enough energy just to survive the next day, you do not have much left for asking deeper questions about the whole arrangement. B-Movie understands that routine is one of the cleanest forms of control. You do not need chains when people can be trained to call exhaustion maturity. You do not need bars when they start believing their worth comes from how useful they are to a machine. Even the language around labor in the movie is eerie. The bees speak about work with the strange pride of people who have forgotten how to separate survival from identity. They do not say, we are forced. They say, this is what we do. That shift sounds tiny, but it changes everything. The moment pain gets renamed as purpose, resistance gets harder. The moment exploitation gets renamed as responsibility, guilt starts doing the work that violence used to do. And that is exactly how a lot of people live. They are drowning in deadlines, tension, and quiet despair, but they call it hustle, dedication, ambition, or being a team player. They are not just tired, they are taught to be proud of being tired. They do not say, I am being drained. They say, I am grinding. That is how a system gets inside your head. It no longer has to force you every minute. It teaches you to manage yourself in its image. And then Barry leaves the hive. And for one brief stretch, the movie lets you feel what freedom might look like. The outside world is dangerous, chaotic, open, unpredictable. Barry is thrilled by it because it gives him something the hive never did. The feeling that life might still contain surprise. But this is where B-Movie becomes smarter and darker than it gets credit for. Because the world outside is not a solution. It is not liberation. It is just a bigger version of the same system. Barry escapes one layer of control, only to discover the global market that has been profiting from it. His personal crisis turns into class consciousness the moment he sees what humans have done with honey. That supermarket scene should be treated like pure horror. It is one of the bleakest discoveries in any animated movie once you understand what it means. Barry sees his species' labor stacked on shelves, bottled, branded, marketed, sold, and consumed by people who had nothing to do with making it. That is the point where the movie stops being about a strange bee and starts being about alienation. The bees create the value. The humans own the value. The bees do the work. The humans package the result and call it theirs. It is one of the clearest images of labor theft you could possibly give an audience without using a single economics textbook. Barry is not just offended because humans are taking honey. He is horrified because he realizes the entire meaning of his society has been captured by outsiders who profit from the bees without having to share in the sacrifice. That is how a lot of workers feel when they start understanding the structure above them. The company talks about family, culture, and mission, but then executives walk away with the reward while the people who made that reward possible get stress, instability, and a pizza party. The world applauds the brand, not the body that broke itself to sustain it. It is one thing to feel trapped in a job. It is another thing to realize your trapped labor is feeding a much larger machine that treats your exhaustion like raw material. B-Movie turns that realization into a visual. Honey in Jars is not just honey in jars. It is your time in a jar. It is your mornings in a jar. It is your back pain, your swallowed frustration, your postponed life, your missed dinner, your mental health, your patience, your last clean ounce of energy. all sitting under fluorescent lights with a price tag on it. So Barry does what every exhausted person dreams of doing at least once. He takes the fight straight to the people cashing in. He sues humanity, and on the surface, this feels like the movie becoming triumphant. Finally, somebody names the theft. Finally, the worker looks a system in the face and says, "You owe us." That emotional charge is real. That is why the courtroom section plays so well. It gives you the fantasy that justice can be achieved inside the structure that enabled the injustice. It gives you the fantasy that if you are brave enough, smart enough, sincere enough, and good enough with words, the machine will eventually admit it was wrong and hand back what it stole. But this is exactly where the movie starts building its cruelest trick. Barry's lawsuit is not true liberation. It is controlled rebellion. It is an individual trying to defeat a giant system by using the system's own official pathways. It feels radical, but it is actually domesticated. The whole thing still depends on permission. It depends on institutions recognizing harm. It depends on the rules of the very world that normalize the exploitation in the first place. That is why the victory feels so exciting and so suspicious at the same time. Because in real life, this is how people are often taught to resist. Fill out the form, file the complaint, follow the process, take the issue to the right department, trust the channels, wait for review, hope the machine judges itself honestly. Sometimes those channels matter, absolutely, but the deeper problem is that people get trained to imagine those channels as the outer limit of resistance. The system says if you have pain, submit it correctly. If you have anger, document it professionally. If you have proof, hand it over and wait. And if you win, do not ask whether the structure itself should still exist in the same form. Barry wins the case, and the movie frames it as justice. The bees get the honey back. Humans lose. The workers finally reclaim what was taken from them. It is the kind of sequence that feels almost revolutionary if you stop the story right there. But stopping there would mean falling for the movie's bait, because B-movie wants you to experience the high of that victory before it rips the floor out from under it. And that rip is what turns the film from a satire about labor into a nightmare about dependence. Before we go deeper into that nightmare, hype the video by liking it and leaving a comment, so the algorithm understands the value of this kind of analysis. And if you want more breakdowns like this, become a member and subscribe. Because once the bees win, the movie immediately asks the question that a lot of stories avoid. What happens if the exploited finally stop producing? This is where B-movie becomes devastating. The bees get what should feel like liberation. They get the right to rest. They get the right to stop working. They get the right to enjoy what they made. And what do they do with that freedom? Nothing. They collapse into it. They drift. They lounge around in tracksuits. They lose direction almost instantly. And that is such a brutal detail because the first disaster after the victory is not environmental. It is psychological. The bees do not know how to exist outside labor. They have been shaped by work so completely that the moment work disappears, identity starts dissolving with it. If that does not hit hard, it should. There are so many people whose sense of self has been colonized by productivity to that exact degree. Ask them who they are, and they answer with a job title. Ask them what they want, and they tell you their next career milestone. Give them a free day, and they feel guilty by noon. Give them a week off, and they start checking messages because stillness feels unnatural. That is not because they love work in some pure way. It is because their nervous system has been trained to confuse busyness with worth. B-movie captures that with painful simplicity. The bees do not become joyful when they stop. They become empty. They have no muscle memory for leisure, no culture of rest, no deep inner life that was protected from the demands of the hive. Their freedom arrives too late, after their imagination has already been flattened by a lifetime of usefulness. That is one of the most depressing ideas in the whole movie. That exploitation does not only take your time, it takes your ability to know what to do with time if you ever get it back. And then the movie moves from psychological collapse to ecological collapse. And this is the part that should haunt anyone who has ever felt trapped by responsibility. Without the bees working, the flowers stop being pollinated. Without pollination, color drains from the world. The parks go dull. The petals sag. The rhythm of life starts failing in public. What looked like a happy ending starts turning into a dead landscape. The movie does not rush through this. And it should not, because this is the core metaphor. The workers stop, and the world starts dying. That is the deepest terror in B movie. Not just that labor is exploitative, but that the entire system has been organized in such a way that exploitation now appears necessary for life itself to continue. Sit with that for a second. The movie is not merely saying that the bees were treated unfairly. It is saying their unfair treatment became a structural pillar. The beauty of the world, the functioning of the ecosystem, the continuation of ordinary life, all of it depended on somebody remaining available for extraction. This is what makes a story so much darker than a simple anti-capitalist fairy tale. It suggests that once a society gets arranged around endless output, the people carrying that output become hostages of the collapse that would follow if they stopped. In the real world, that feeling is everywhere. Parents stay in soul-killing jobs because rent will not wait. Nurses push through impossible shifts because patients still need care. Teachers burn themselves down because children still need stability. Warehouse workers keep going because packages do not stop. Drivers keep driving because food, medicine, and money still have to move. Millions of people are made to feel, sometimes correctly, and sometimes manipulatively, that if they put themselves first for even 1 minute, everything around them will suffer. That is a powerful kind of guilt. It is no longer just fear of poverty. It is fear of being responsible for collapse. And systems love that kind of guilt because it turns morality into a leash. The exhausted person stops being just exploited and starts feeling obligated to keep the world from breaking. In B movie, that guilt gets painted onto flowers. You can almost feel the emotional blackmail in those dying gardens. The message becomes, look what happens when labor rests. Look what happens when the machine is not fed. Look what your refusal costs everyone else. This is exactly how so many overworked people get trapped. If they complain, they are told the team depends on them. If they slow down, they are told customers depend on them. If they quit, they are told their family depends on them. If they set a boundary, they are told the operation depends on them. So they keep giving and giving because they are not just afraid of losing income. They are afraid of becoming the reason something fails. B movie takes that emotional structure and turns it into apocalypse. And visually, it is heartbreaking. The dried flowers are not just a plot device. They are a symbol of what happens when the burden of maintaining life is placed on a group that is never allowed to simply live. The beauty of the world exists, but it exists at their expense. The calm garden exists, but it exists because somebody kept flying, kept gathering, kept producing, kept serving, kept postponing themselves. The bees are not offered partnership with the world. They are conscripted into sustaining it. This is why the movie feels so adult once you decode it. It understands that the worker's deepest prison is not always force. Sometimes, it is indispensability. If you can convince somebody that everything collapses without them, they may never feel free enough to stop. And the saddest part is that the movie shows how quickly people can become unable to enjoy the freedom they fought for. The bees win and immediately reveal how damaged they already were. They have no plan beyond stopping. They have no social vision. They do not gather and ask, how can we build a fairer version of this world? They do not rethink distribution, rhythm, or responsibility. They just sit in the ruins of their own conditioning. That is another brutal truth about exploitation. It narrows your imagination. When all your energy goes into surviving the system, you often do not have enough left to picture what comes after it. People trapped in grinding routines are sometimes accused of lacking ambition outside work, but that misses the point. It is hard to imagine a new world when the current one already consumes every hour. B movie gets this in a painful way. The bees know how to work and how to stop. They do not know how to reorganize life. So, the story quietly pushes the audience toward a dark conclusion. Maybe there is no alternative. Maybe labor has to continue exactly like this because the experiment in freedom failed. That is, ideology at its sharpest. It does not need to say the system is good. It only needs to make every other possibility look impossible. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I think about how many people live that exact emotional cycle. They hate the pace they are trapped in. They dream of escape. They fantasize about rest. But when rest finally comes, it feels scary, hollow, undeserved, or unsustainable, because the structure that harmed them also taught them to distrust stillness. They have spent so long being measured by output that quiet starts to feel like erasure. B-movie captures that with a weird honesty. The bees are not dancing in freedom, they are numbed by it. Their souls have been trained for one thing. Work gave them pain, but it also gave them shape. And now the shape is gone. That is how deep the system can get into a person. It can make the source of your suffering also feel like the source of your meaning. If you want to support the work behind this channel, check out the exclusive animation shirts linked below. The movie's most powerful visual turn, though, is still that dried-up park. The sadness of those scenes matters because they reveal the emotional blackmail built into the world of the film. The flowers do not just wither, they accuse. Every dead blossom says the same thing. Get back to work. Every empty field says your rest is too expensive. Every fading color says the world only stays alive if somebody keeps sacrificing themselves for it. That is such a violent lesson to hide inside a comedy. Because if the world has been built in a way that makes your exhaustion morally necessary, then your exhaustion becomes very hard to refuse. You start carrying two burdens at once. You carry the burden of labor itself, and you carry the burden of believing other people would suffer if you stopped. That is one reason burnout can be so hard to escape. It is not just physical depletion, it is a guilt spiral. People convince themselves that resting is selfish, that boundaries are dangerous, that stepping back means abandoning others. A lot of institutions actively feed that mindset because it keeps the most responsible people overextending themselves. The ones with conscience are often the easiest to exploit. They are the ones who stay late because they know someone else will have to pick up the slack. They are the ones who answer the call because they know the team is understaffed. They are the ones who come in sick because they do not want to let everyone down. Systems built on scarcity and pressure love people like that. B-movie frames the same trap on a giant, colorful scale. The bees are not simply workers. They are the hidden support structure of the world's beauty. If they stop, nature goes gray. That makes every act of self-protection look like sabotage. And once a story teaches that lesson, it becomes very hard for the main character to remain a rebel. Barry has to face the fact that his victory produced collapse. That is the kind of revelation that crushes a dissenter from the inside. He no longer feels like a liberator. He feels like the guy who broke everything. So, what does he do? He rushes to restore the system. That is the moment when the movie's politics snap into focus. Barry does not use the crisis to ask how the world could be reorganized so that life can continue without totalizing exploitation. He does not use the emergency to build a fairer model. He uses the emergency to restart the old one. And that is exactly what so many real systems count on. They do not need resistance to disappear completely. They only need resistance to become frightened enough by instability that it chooses restoration over transformation. Once people are shown a glimpse of chaos, they often run back to the familiar cage. Even a painful normal can feel safer than an unknown future. Barry's big arc, then, is not the arc of a revolutionary. It is the arc of a worker who discovers the truth, challenges it, gets overwhelmed by the consequences, and returns to service under a new emotional story. That new story is what matters. He is no longer just following orders. He is now doing something noble. He is saving flowers. He is protecting life. He is helping balance the world. Notice how quickly exploitation becomes easier to accept when it gets wrapped in meaning. This happens all the time outside the movie. Corporations are incredibly good at turning obedience into identity and identity into pride. They do not say, "Make us richer." They say, "Join our mission." They do not say, "Sacrifice your evenings." They say, "Show commitment." They do not say, "Let your job occupy your inner life." They say, "Bring your whole self to work." The language gets softer while the extraction stays hard. Barry's return to labor is not framed as defeat. It is framed as maturity. That is why the ending is so disturbing. The movie wants you to smile because Barry has found purpose. But if you watch closely, what he has really found is a more comfortable explanation for why he is back inside the machine. He does not destroy the hive system. He does not create a new social contract. He goes back to work. The rebellion gets absorbed. The energy of protest gets converted into renewed functionality. That is one of the bleakest endings a labor story can have, and the movie acts like it is uplifting. Then comes one of the sharpest symbols in the whole film. Barry's lawyer badge. On paper, it looks like advancement. It looks like he grew, evolved, claimed a higher role, earned a more powerful identity. But what is a badge if not another sanctioned label inside the same world? It is still a role. It is still a credential. It is still a way of making the self legible to a structure that values people based on function. Barry does not become free. He gets a new badge, and that badge helps him feel like his labor belongs to him now. A lot of adults know exactly what that feels like. They escape one draining role only to enter another one with a better title, a cleaner desk, a little more respect, and the same old surrender of time. They tell themselves this version is different because it sounds more important. The chain is still a chain, but now it shines. The body is still exhausted, but now the exhaustion has prestige. The life is still structured around work, but now there is a flattering narrative attached to it. That is how systems stabilize themselves after critique. They do not always have to crush dissent. Sometimes they just offer a more dignified-looking place inside the same arrangement. And that is why the end of B-movie should make you uneasy instead of relieved. Barry has not escaped exploitation. He has learned to romanticize it. He is working again, not because the system was transformed into something humane, but because he has been convinced that his participation is noble. That is the lesson so many people absorb in real life. They are taught to frame overwork as passion, self-erasure as service, burnout as proof that they cared enough. They are praised for going above and beyond until above and beyond becomes the new baseline. They are rewarded for availability until constant availability starts feeling like a personality trait. They are told to take pride in being needed, even when being needed is exactly what keeps them from living their own lives. B-movie does not challenge that logic in the end. It seals it. It says the world is too fragile for workers to stay free for long. It says rest may feel good, but rest cannot be allowed to win. It says rebellion is understandable, but function must be restored. That is why I keep coming back to the flowers. The dead park is not just a warning about nature, it is a warning about guilt. It is the movie's way of telling every worker, every parent, every caregiver, every exhausted person, every overextended soul. If you stop, look what happens. If you stop, things dry out. If you stop, beauty suffers. If you stop, life loses color. That message can crush a person because it sounds so moral. It makes self-preservation feel selfish. It makes boundaries feel destructive. It makes recovery feel irresponsible. And yet the tragedy is that no one asks the deeper question: why was the world built to require this much sacrifice from the same bodies over and over again? Why is the burden arranged so unevenly? Why is the system so incapable of protecting both life and the people sustaining life? B-movie never truly answers that because the movie is less interested in redesigning the world than in pushing Barry back into it. But as viewers, we can ask the question the film avoids. We can notice that a healthy society would not depend on endless hidden exhaustion. A healthy system would not make rest look apocalyptic. A healthy life would not require you to disappear into your function before being called responsible. That is what makes the film feel so eerie when you grow older. It does not simply show labor as hard, it shows labor as the thing everything else feeds on. It shows the worker not as a citizen among equals, but as the silent support beam nobody notices until it cracks. That is an incredibly dark picture of adulthood, and it is one that resonates because so many people have already felt it in their bones. They have felt that they are carrying more than their job description. They have felt that if they falter, too much falls with them. They have felt their own life shrinking while other people praise their reliability. They have felt the weird shame that comes from needing rest in a culture that worships endurance. B-movie turns all of that into a fable. Barry's brief rebellion matters because it exposes the trap, but the ending matters more because it explains why the trap is so hard to escape. The trap is not just economic, It is emotional, social, and existential. You are not only paid to keep going, you are guilted, praised, needed, and shaped into continuing. And once that shaping goes deep enough, you start calling the chains by nicer names. Purpose, professionalism, duty, commitment, passion, service, adulthood. That is the real horror of the ending. Barry does not drag himself back in kicking and screaming. He returns with posture. He returns with a role. He returns with meaning. That is a far more stable prison than the one he had at the start, because now he believes in it. The system does not need to chase him as hard anymore. He has internalized the reason to stay. If this is connecting a few ugly dots for you, hype the video by liking it and leaving a comment. It helps more than you think. There is another layer to all of this that makes the movie even sadder. Barry's win in court gives the audience a burst of hope that the individual can beat a giant system through talent and courage alone. That is a fantasy modern culture loves because it keeps structural problems feeling personal and solvable one exceptional person at a time. If the story were honest in a more threatening way, it would show that one bee winning one case changes almost nothing if the whole world is still built to rely on the endless conversion of life into output. But stories often flatter us with the idea that awareness plus courage equals liberation. B-movie flirts with that and then quietly takes it back. Barry's exceptionalism is not enough. His intelligence is not enough. His bravery is not enough. The system is bigger than one triumph because it is woven into material reality. Flowers still need pollination, markets still need value. Societies still need labor. The real question is, who pays the cost and whether the cost is shared justly, and the movie never gets there. So, Barry's rebellion gets folded back into the larger order, and the audience is invited to call that wisdom. That is probably the most depressing move the script makes. It teaches the rebel to fear his own success. It teaches the worker that winning too much could be catastrophic. It teaches the viewer that rest without redesign leads to collapse, and then it leaves redesign off the table. Back to work becomes the only imaginable rescue. If you have ever wondered why so many people defend systems that exhaust them, this is a good place to look. People are not always defending the cruelty itself. Often, they are defending the little zone of order that cruelty currently holds together. They know the machine hurts them, but they also know the machine pays the bills, keeps the lights on, feeds the kids, stocks the shelves, runs the hospitals, moves the trucks, and keeps the flowers alive. So when someone talks about major change, they do not just hear hope. They hear risk. They hear instability. They hear the possibility that the weak points in their life could break first. B-movie dramatizes that fear better than most openly political stories do. It says, yes, the system exploits you, but if you break it, you may hate what comes after. That is the perfect recipe for resignation. It is how whole populations get taught to settle for grinding discomfort over uncertain freedom. It is how adults end up saying things like, this is just how life is, or it is not ideal, but what is the alternative? The alternative is never allowed to grow because all available energy is spent managing the damage of the present. That is why the movie keeps haunting me. Under the jokes and weird romance and internet meme history, it is carrying this relentlessly bleak idea that human beings, or bees, can be trained to accept almost any level of personal depletion if they are convinced the world depends on it. And maybe the cruelest part is that the world really often does depend on them, but only because no one in power ever bothered to build a world that would not. So, when the credits roll, the lesson is not that justice was done. The lesson is that justice inside a broken structure can still circle back into obedience. The lesson is that your rebellion can be absorbed, your victory can be repurposed, your conscience can be leveraged, and your need for meaning can be used to lock you back into the same machine that frightened you in the first place. Barry is not the hero who freed the hive. He is the worker who discovered the bars, rattled them, scared himself with what lay beyond them, and then chose to decorate them. That is why B-movie feels less like a children's comedy and more like an adult nightmare wrapped in bright colors. It is about the lie of freedom inside systems that need your exhaustion. It is about how easy it is to confuse a new role with a new life. It is about how the world can make your suffering feel morally necessary. And above all, it is about how people learn to love the story that keeps them functioning, because the alternative is to stare directly at a terrifying thought. Maybe the garden was never maintained fairly, maybe the beauty was never free, and maybe the thing holding everything together was always someone else's unpaid, unseen, unending sacrifice. That is why Barry never really wins. He just stops imagining a life outside usefulness. And that, more than the lawsuit or the jokes or the memes, is what makes B-Movie one of the most quietly depressing portraits of adulthood ever put into an animated film.